It's not projected out in any speakers in here. It's
Oh, I see. It's just recording.
Yeah.
Got it.
So they'll let us know if it, for some reason, doesn't.
Yeah. And I'll go and check from the computer too, just to make sure all the sound sounds good.
Thanks.
So,
Yes, we do. These are double. We'll go quickly though. I'm Alison, and we haven't met. Miguel, very nice to meet you. Oh, great. That's all right. Oh, yeah. And then maybe save as type. Right. There we go. Yep. Ready? Okay, great.
you see, they're going to be talking about overcoming barriers to cycling in low-income and minority communities, and just to, for the sake of not spending more time, just going to pass through Lynn, and you can maybe talk a little bit about IBPI at the beginning. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you very much for having us today. Alison and I are going to be talking about a project that was initiated by the Community Cycling Center last year with some involvement from IBPI. So what we're going to do today is first I'm going to lay a little bit of groundwork for the project and talk a little bit about some of the things we do and don't know about barriers to cycling in general. And then I'm going to hand it over to Alison to talk about the specifics of the process of this project and some of the results, the preliminary results that we found. As most of you probably know, IBPI is a program here that's located in the Center for Transportation Studies, and our mission is to lead innovation in research, education, and knowledge that promotes change to make communities safe, convenient, and accessible places to walk and to ride a bike. And so we partner with nonprofit, public, and private organizations to conduct research and to do program evaluation in addition to our education and professional development programs. What I'm going to do now is let Alison talk just a little bit about the Cycling Center to give you a context before I launch into the beginning of the presentation.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everybody. Alison from the Community Cycling Center. And how many of you have heard of the Community Cycling Center before? Oh, good. A lot of you. Super. So you know that we're located, we have a bike shop located on Alberta Street at 17th. Then you probably also know that we are a nonprofit. So as a nonprofit, we also run this for-profit business or a small business as part of our nonprofit. We're a hybrid organization. So in addition to refurbishing bicycles and selling them in the community, we also have bicycle safety programs for children and adults, for the general public, as well as specifically targeted to low-income children and adults. So in those programs, we do education, encouragement, we do events, we do all kinds of stuff. And the idea is that we want to provide a lot of different access points for people to engage with bicycling. Why? Because we believe that bicycling really can change the community, can help individuals be healthier, and can help the community to be healthier. And that's really our aim, is to build a strong and healthy community. This is the mural on the side of our bike shop at 17th in Alberta. And in a way, it's our image for the future of Portland, which is a vibrant place where people of all backgrounds choose bicycles to get around, to stay healthy and connected. The future might not include so many costumes, but we do hope that it includes lots of different kinds of people on lots of different kinds of bicycles toward lots of different kinds of activities. So we are a $1.5 million organization with 25 staff people, and we have about 1,200 volunteers a year as well. A little context for the Community Cycling Center.
Great, thank you. As Alison said, they're located in Northeast Portland, and for those of you who've been in Portland for very long know that this has been historically the home of the African American population in the area. But more recently, it's also seen a wave of immigration from Latino and African communities as well. And so one of their organizational niches, as she didn't mention, is serving those communities of color. And we know from research that these are the folks that have some of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes and disproportionate rates of poverty. So they're an especially important population to reach out to in cycling. And we also know that they historically have low rates of bicycle use in Portland and in the U.S. Another thing about the Cycling Center is their focus on community, as Alison mentioned. But they've also defined a geographic focus for their programs within about a 5-mile radius of their office and their bike store. And so that is significant for this project. They've also articulated a strategy to develop institutional partnerships within the community to support community health both through physical activity and active transportation. And again, this is laying the groundwork for this project we're going to talk about. A little bit of background here. As we know, cycling is a transportation mode that is great for the environment, it's great for the economy, and it's great for our health. At the federal level, ever since ICE-T and the successive bills passed in Congress, the funding for non-motorized transportation, including cycling, has increased, although we know it's still a very small portion of the federal transportation budget. And intuitively know that cycling must be good for our health. And a lot of recent research and attention to active living has really confirmed and generated more research and evidence to support this. So we see the potential for cycling not just as recreation, but also as transport. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that when we look at trip distances, one of the barriers oftentimes people cite is, well, things are too far away. But when we look at trips across the U.S., we can see from this chart that a lot of our shopping trips are under 2 miles, which is an easy bike ride. And even almost 40% of work trips in the U.S. are under 2 miles. So the whole distance thing isn't necessarily as much of a barrier as a lot of people think. The other thing is that most of the research on cycling has focused primarily on environmental factors, things like the quality of the route, what the traffic conditions are like, signals, lane design, surface conditions, access to land uses, and some other environmental correlates such as weather and slope. And we've seen a little bit of research like that here in Portland. We're looking at some of the bike facilities, such as the bike boxes. We're evaluating the cycle tracks and the bike boulevards to see if they're indeed safer and more accessible for cyclists and help promote bicycling. We're also seeing some research in the field on program evaluation, seeing how effective programs like the Safe Routes to Schools programs are in increasing bicycle and walking trips to school. Here in Portland, we see things like the Smart Trips and Sunday Parkways, which are also being evaluated to see how much they're changing behaviors and encouraging more people to walk and ride a bike. And we know a little bit about bicyclists in general, but there's a lot we don't know as well. We do know that cyclists overall are likely to be male and younger, but we don't have a lot of understanding of overall bicycling behavior, and especially we have very little research on cycling among women, low-income, and minority communities. Now here in Portland over the years, the city of Portland has developed kind of their categorization of cyclists, and you see the kind of extremes at one end. We have the 10% or so that are confident, some say the fearless, and I can't remember what all the other words are to describe them, but they're the ones that are going to ride anywhere, anytime. You're not going to change their minds. They're still going to ride. And then at the other end, we have a bigger number, the no way, no how, you're never going to get me on a bicycle. But we have a huge number in the middle here, and that's really the target audience, both for new bicycle facilities and for programs, encouragement and education programs, to get these people thinking about bicycling, to think about being comfortable on a bike and actually going out and ride. But one of the things is that we really need to understand their interests and concerns before we can develop programs to address their needs. And so the last thing I want to talk about before I turn it over to Alison is the new bike master plan, and just this graphic that illustrates how the city's thinking and really the region's thinking has evolved from really only looking at those fearless cyclists and really thinking about them to kind of that mid-range where if you're a confident cyclist and you're already pretty much thinking about cycling, that's who the bike master plan was for in the 90s. But now the idea is that bicycling is for everyone, and the city's facilities and programs really need to serve our whole population. And so this creates a lot of opportunities to develop new programs and reach out to new audiences, which is what this project is about. And one last statistic here. We do know that our population is changing. We are seeing an increasing number of people from other countries, of different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures here in Portland. So again, the time is right for programs like the one that Alison is going to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks again, everybody, for your interest in this conversation. This has been a rich learning experience for the Community Cycling Center and a great opportunity for us to partner with other kinds of organizations and to learn a lot about our community. So why did we take on this inquiry? Well, the first thing that we did a couple of years ago, the Community Cycling Center started a process of evaluating who are we and what are we really trying to do in the community. Thanks. Familiar with the technology here. And one of the things that we recognized was that there was a gap. There seemed to be a gap between the bicycle community and how decisions were being made regarding the bicycles and bicycle infrastructure and bicycle programming in Portland and the community in Portland. And as an organization that had a specific focus on serving communities of color, there seemed to be a gap between the communities of color specifically and decisions about bicycling. So we wanted to get a sense for, well, was there any interest in regards to bicycling with communities of color? And if there was interest, then what are the barriers to bicycling? So we've started a process. So the goal was to essentially establish partnerships with community leaders and to discover where bicycling really could be a solution to address health and transportation priorities. So what we did was we began by simply trying to establish the common ground between bicycling and community health and the rest of the community. So we started making phone calls and introducing the Community Cycling Center to different organizations, different leaders serving communities of color, to get a sense for whether there was any common ground related to bicycling. And specifically, we were targeting African American communities Lynn was talking about, because that was the, Northeast Portland, where we're located, is where there's a high population of African Americans. Actually, about 45% of the population is African American in that neighborhood. And Latino community, as you saw from the previous slide, is not only present but also projected to grow considerably in the next 20 years. So in addition, there have been other immigrant communities arriving in the area. And we just wanted to get a sense for whether there was interest in what kind of conversation we could start. We received funding from Metro for a 2-year project that included a first phase of providing or performing a needs assessment, which simply was doing this process of asking about interests and concerns around bicycling, and then designing in the second phase of the project, in the second year, a pilot program to address some of those concerns that we found. What that did for us as an organization was it really forced us to shift how we were organized and oriented in the community. In the past, we were much more oriented towards serving individuals, what we refer to as the social service model. And in doing this, we really wanted to make a long-term impact in the area, and so it required us to be thinking at different levels in the community. So not only family and friends and social networks, but other organizations, which is why we began the process of pursuing partnerships with other groups who were interested in community health. And it also required us to be thinking about how do we as an organization consider our efforts toward policy change. And that was a big shift for the Community Cycling Center, because in the past, we have not been an advocacy organization. And when I first started in 2005 as a volunteer, I asked, well, what do we do around advocacy? And the answer was, well, we don't do advocacy. And I said, well, isn't education advocacy? And people said, well, maybe. And over time, we've really begun acknowledging and recognizing the important role that education does play in advocacy, but now we're even taking an additional step by thinking about what are the policies and the barriers that can be overcome in order to help people to live a healthier life. So that was a shift for us as an organization. As I've talked about, we started by simply meeting with community leaders. We met with more than 70 different leaders, organizers, individuals, groups in the area to get a sense for what the concerns are, what the issues are for those communities. As Lynn also mentioned, obesity, isolation, crisis of physical inactivity, these are all very important concerns that we heard as we spoke with leaders in the African American and the Latino, the African immigrant communities specifically. We originally planned to select 5 community partners. And as we were going about the process, we realized that as an organization that has 23, 25 staff members, we didn't have the capacity to take on 5 partnerships and do that really well. So we honed the number of partners that we chose to select so we could be highly invested in those partnerships and very effective in those partnerships. The next part that we wanted to do once we had selected community partners was to get a sense from community members whether there was any interest at the community level around bicycling. And then once we had determined some sense of interest, then we could ask deeper questions by organizing what we were calling focus groups or open houses. So that was a bit about the process. There's a little bit of what the meetings looked like. The first picture is one of the meetings that we had in New Columbia. New Columbia was is one of our community partners. They're in North Portland. They're a multifamily affordable housing development run by the Housing Authority of Portland. As we were going about these conversations with community leaders, we got a lot of feedback about our approach. And they helped us to create a process that worked for them. And that was one of the key lessons, that we wanted to be true partners in the process. So we really listened to the feedback that we were provided. That was one of the reasons that we scaled back from the goal of 5 down to 2. And we modified our approach. Originally, we planned to form a steering committee and form working groups. And they said, that's not going to work for us. We're very busy. We have a lot of priorities. We are focus grouped to death and steering committee to death. So please don't ask us to do that. We're happy to work with you. We're very interested, but let's think differently about how we approach what we're trying to achieve. There you go. The slide catches up with my statements. And so the other part was they really encouraged us to think about what are you going to, if we're going to be providing this information for you, what can you offer us? So we have a number of programs that we could deliver. We have a holiday bike drive, which is simply a giveaway and safety education event for very young children. And we're actually on Saturday, tomorrow, holding a Bikes for Kids event at Hacienda, which is our second partner. And 75 children will be receiving a bicycle and safety education, and we'll be talking with parents. So we're really excited about that. It's one example of how we're bringing resources to the project and engaging and creating a conversation with the community. And that represents our organizational commitment, a piece that we were also really strongly encouraged to consider because in addition to feeling surveyed a lot, organizations often will go and attempt to build a partnership, and then when things get hard, they'll back off. And they said, if you want to come and be a partner, be a partner. Work with us, stick with us, and we'll figure things out. It may not always be easy, but keep with us. So again, part of what we're trying to do is to demonstrate what our level of commitment through what we can bring. So as I've mentioned, Hacienda Community Development Corporation is our second partner, as is Housing Authority of Portland. Hacienda is in Northeast, and New Columbia is in North Portland. There's some pictures of the groups. And we specifically chose these partners because of not only that 5-mile radius of their locations from our bike shop there in the blue star in the middle, but also where they related on this gap analysis, which is, if anybody has read the Portland Bike Master Plan, this was a part of the project that we participated in terms of creating an equity filter in the master plan and requesting that the city perform a gap analysis to compare the bicycle network infrastructure with where people live in Portland. So what this map represents, the areas of the deeper red color are the higher areas of percentage where communities of color reside, and the green outlines are where the bicycle network is the weakest. So you can see some pretty interesting correlations there. So not only did we find partners who were specifically interested in this partnership, but they're in areas where the bicycle network, in some cases, there's some work to do. So to introduce Hacienda, about 1,800 residents, about 50% children. Again, they're in Northeast Portland. These are some photographs of their facility. These are some photographs of the streets around Hacienda. So I don't know if anybody knows where they're located, but the site that we're working with is on Killingsworth Street, which is right near Columbia Boulevard and Cully Boulevard. So very high traffic streets with high speeds, and there are, in some cases, sidewalks, but not always. There are bike lanes, but very few people are using them, and it's pretty easy to understand why. It's not a very bike-friendly area. New Columbia is a different facility, larger, 2,500 residents, again, 50% children. Many languages are spoken, many countries are represented. This is a redeveloped property in North Portland, and the facilities are nicer. They're more recent. There's walking space, there's bicycling space, there's park space, and park space is actually is missing near Hacienda. I referred to how we were beginning the process of getting a sense, once we had the partners, of whether people in the community were actually interested in bicycling. So last summer we went to neighborhood events. We created a survey, but then we also trained staff. We were wearing our T-shirts and we had bike lights to give away in exchange for a conversation about bicycling. We had that discussion with community residents who were self-selected and asked questions about, are you interested in bicycling? And if you are interested, where do you go? And if you're not interested, what's getting in the way? So we could gauge general levels of interest and some of the concerns. And one of the things that we learned was that there was interest. That was very promising. More than 50% of the people we spoke with did ride a bicycle. They often were riding them for recreation or socially, as we're calling it, running errands, visiting family, visiting friends. And the themes that came up that were some of the concerns or barriers related to the cost of the bicycle or repairing it, safety, all kinds of themes around safety, and different topics around riding, including where to ride and even how to ride. So once we gauged and had a sense for the level of interest, then we could conduct focus groups. And with the focus groups, we organized 5 different events. We called them open houses. We designed them in a way to make them as comfortable and familiar as possible so that people didn't feel like they were being studied. We had really good food that was culturally specific. We had child care. We had 2 sessions that were conducted in Spanish, 2 sessions that were conducted or translated in Somali and May, and we had 1 session conducted in English with an African American group. They were really rich discussions. They were a lot of fun. Some of the themes that came up, cost was the biggest theme. A lot of people talked about the cost of a bicycle, meaning that they didn't have a bicycle and they just didn't have the resources to purchase one. And if their bicycle was broken, they didn't have the resources to repair it. They didn't know anybody locally to bring it to, and they weren't, bike shops just didn't come up as an option, which was interesting. Some of the themes around safety, things you've probably heard or you may even feel yourself. Don't like riding on busy streets, don't know safe routes to ride, don't feel safe in the neighborhood. That came up a lot around the Hacienda facility, and don't have a safe place to put my bicycle. That bike storage and secure bike storage was a huge issue. And then these topics around riding a bike were really interesting to us. As you saw in some of the earlier statistics, a lot of children live in these facilities, so there's big families, lots of kids, and people want to spend time with their children. They want to spend time with their children doing something healthy and fun, and so that came out in parents wanting to ride with their children. But for some parents, and these were specifically moms for the most part, some didn't learn how to ride. Language was a barrier for many who don't speak English, meaning that the materials that are printed or classes that are provided simply aren't available in their languages. And it related to wanting to ride with your children. A lot of people talked about riding socially, riding with friends, riding with a group, and we thought that was a really fun idea too. So some of the good news, again, bicycling for health. All the groups that we spoke with talked about how health was important, and that bicycling seemed to be one of many good ways to be healthy. And again, the riding with the group was really interesting to us in the different ways people talked about that. Some of the bad news or the harder challenges, the cost I mentioned, the knowledge. And for the interesting piece about the knowledge, one was the language, but the other part of that was it seemed that information about bicycling and bicycle resources simply isn't reaching these communities. In a few cases, the conversations that we had with the groups, there wasn't even awareness that Portland was a bicycle-friendly city. So that says to me that that information, those stories, that strategy simply isn't reaching the neighborhood. Fear of cars, I think a lot of people have that concern, came up a number of times, safe storage, and cultural perceptions. Bicycles for children, and then in a few cases, bicycles are for white people, and that bicycles are, they're not cool. So now into some of the more specific findings. You can see from the different, just to decipher these slides a little bit, the drawings of the people, they're organized by the different groups we spoke with, the African American, the Hispanic, and the African groups. So you can get a sense by group where the concern or the interests were by these themes. So for the immigrant communities, cost is a major issue, major barrier. And then related to that, interestingly, around the repair, the American culture seems to be kind of creeping in in the sense that when you're in America, you throw things away, you don't fix them. And so there's opportunity to help perhaps develop skill sets at the local level so that there's the ability and awareness to repair bicycles and keep them on the road. Again, a lot of people talked about riding with their children. And again, in the Hispanic and the African immigrant communities, that was talked about a lot. But there are challenges to that. Riding with children and making multiple trips, multiple stops is very challenging. If you have little kids and you need to bring them to school and then run to the grocery store, it's a lot of things to manage. And bicycles, while interesting, it may not always be practical. Learning how to ride came up primarily from, again, with the immigrant communities and specifically the African group that we spoke with. The women said that they were very interested, like I said, to ride with their children. They wanted to spend that time with them, but they had never learned how to ride. So that creates an interesting opportunity for programming. Like I've said before, riding with a group, everybody is interested in riding. The people we spoke with indicated an interest in riding with groups, socially organized rides, small group rides. Some people talked about riding with women's specific groups. Others talked about having an interest in riding with more diverse groups. But then we get to the safety issues, and these were really wide-ranging. The safe bike storage was a big issue. It came up a lot with the Hispanic group, and that's primarily based at Hacienda. Those are the groups that we spoke with at Hacienda. And while there's interest, there's not a lot of space in their homes. It's against the rules to store bicycles on the porches, and there isn't other bike storage facilities on the site. So you can see that the structure of the facility is a barrier. Also with the Hispanic group, and again this was at Hacienda, there was a concern about just general safety in the neighborhood. And as I would describe the streets in the neighborhood itself, that I believe is why there's that a concern. The other piece that came up specifically with the Hispanic group was concerns about being pulled over by the police. And that related to not knowing the rules of the road. And again, that related to that information simply not getting to the community. They were concerned that if they were riding and they didn't know whether they needed a helmet or lights or how to make a turn, that they'd be vulnerable to be pulled over by the police. The other interesting culturally specific conversation was concern about drivers being hostile. And this was the African American, the conversation with the African American group, where we talked a lot about drivers and bicyclists. And they were talking about it from both sides, as being drivers and being concerned and confused about how bicyclists behave, and then also being concerned as a bicyclist of how drivers would then perceive them as bicyclists. And to me, that talks about the lack of knowledge generally about what the rules of the road are for both. One person talked about their confusion over when a bicyclist made this signal and then turned right. So to them, I mean, this is to me fundamental bicycle safety education that's simply not being widely known. So there are some real fundamental breakdowns in communication, in my mind, in the community if that simple lack of information is creating this concern and fear. The really fun part of the conversations turned from, after we talked about issues, concerns, and interests, to, okay, what are we going to do about it? So as the Community Cycling Center, one thing we're doing, like I mentioned earlier, is we're concentrating our programs with these partners. These are a list on this table of different programs that we provide. We have a bike club, which is an Earn a Bike program for young children after school. Bikes for Kids is the very young children receiving their first bike. Create a Commuter is a program for low-income adults to receive a bicycle in partnership with workforce development organizations. We organize a family ride, and then we have a Bike Mobile, which is a vehicle that's full of bike safety supplies. We'll go back to the community and fix bicycles and do more mini clinics. And then we have an iRide portrait campaign. I'll show you that in a minute. So we're really providing the support to the partners and the participants to continue the conversation, to develop the community, and to identify local neighborhood champions so that we can really begin to engage a longer conversation about what else we can do and what more we can do locally in the neighborhood to promote education and engagement with the community and the partners to increase ridership and work together to identify those areas where there are barriers that we can work to resolve. Another part of that is to make success visible. This is our iRide campaign, and we simply go out in the community and take portraits of people with their bicycles and ask them to complete the survey, iRide, ... and then we create these portraits. And we bring these with us, and we continue to take photographs and create these posters with the people in the communities. Are you saying no helmet? Well, that's a really interesting point. Helmets are also a barrier. We talked with a lot of people, actually after we did this round of surveying, especially young people and African Americans who say, I'm just not going to wear a helmet. It just doesn't fit my head. It doesn't. I don't want to mess up my hair. And I think it's a really interesting bit of feedback for helmet manufacturers. How can they design a different kind of helmet? So some of the lessons that we learned, and these were really rich, and we wanted to document them on different levels. We wanted to talk about them in terms of the partners, we wanted to document them in terms of the programs, and we wanted to document them in terms of our organization. So a couple of themes. One is it's all about relationships. This is all about us getting to know people and understanding what people's concerns are and what people's interests are, and then working together to address the challenge. And in doing so, being genuine in finding the common ground, in finding the solutions, and again, offering something, coming to the table with something to provide as both a measure of goodwill and a way to engage. Around programs, again, at the program level, it was all about relationships with program designers, program developers, program managers, and to be inclusive, again, to consider their limitations, their interests, and their ideas as we work together to create new solutions. And in the process, engaging the community and developing their skills and their leadership to be a resource within their neighborhood and their community, and to develop together our skills to advocate for change. For our organization, I talked about being realistic about our capacity. We needed to make decisions about how much we could take on. And that's, again, why we chose 2 partners, so we could do 2 really well. And now we're beginning to assess where do we go from here and how do we expand. At the same time, we needed to increase our own organizational cultural competence. That means that we need to look at how well we know the different cultures that are residing in Portland and how we can increase our own ability to understand their issues and increase the diversity of our staff as well. And in the process, be really flexible. Listen, roll with it, figure it out. There's no roadmap. You know, just try to make it work. Another fun part of the project was really identifying some of these other solutions that are new ideas. So bike ownership programs, earn a bike programs, or bike fleet programs. Training workshops that were facilitated in specific languages by the neighborhood, by participants, teaching them how to teach those programs so that they're a resource in their communities. As well as looking at education and assistance at the residential area. So what are the policy and physical revisions that we can make? What kind of on-site tool repair could we provide? Or tool sharing? So thank you for listening. It's been a really rich process, as I said at the beginning. A lot of learning, a lot more to work to do. We're very interested in continuing the conversation. And if you have ideas or feedback, we're very open to it. You can reach us at the communitycyclingcenter.org or come and talk to me afterward. Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks. I think We have a few minutes for questions, and I know there's something that you have to push on one of the little black boxes if you're going to ask the question, so it gets recorded for the video streaming. So, yeah.
Make sure to push the button, otherwise you use the microphone.
Okay.
Have there been any attempts to install, like either install bike boxes at, or bike racks at Hacienda, or to change the rules in the community so that they can actually store their bikes somewhere?
Yeah, we have, that'll be one of the conversations that we have with leadership there. We haven't yet had that conversation. We simply just completed gathering this information. Now we'll be going to them and asking them about that. I think that there's a big difference between the facilities rules at these multifamily affordable housing developments and then the facilities rules with the city of Portland. So we need to figure out how to navigate both of those systems and, you know, be reasonable about what we push for early on, because this is just the very beginning of the process. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so we'll talk with them about this feedback and then see where we are after that. But it seems like a reasonable solution.
Here in front.
I just have a simple question throughout this. I haven't heard anything about the weather impact.
Can you push? Yeah, talk into the.
I have a concern. I mean, you have not shown anything about the weather impact and how that can be handled by a cyclist, like heavy rain, snow, in that season,
Oh,
how
weather.
they can commute to
yeah.
work.
Oh yeah. So how weather is a barrier? Is that what you're asking?
I said in your presentation, I have not noticed anything about that.
Yeah.
And what is the, you know, your take on that?
Yeah. It didn't come up in our conversations, and so we're simply presenting what people talked about in the conversations. And I know that weather is a barrier, and I know that I would imagine that for the folks that we spoke with, weather would be a concern. My sense is that there are other more immediate barriers before they could even think about weather being one. And I also want to clarify, we're not necessarily talking about bicycles as transportation, or bicycles for commuting to work, except for that one program. We're simply trying to encourage people to try it. And, you know, social riding or recreational riding would be perfectly acceptable and encouraged. So it simply didn't come up yet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You had mentioned that a lot of the cycling information doesn't reach these communities. Did you come up with any ways that that information can make it out to those communities?
Yeah, we've already talked with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. They have different information sessions, and they're going to be going to Hacienda to present one of their sessions. They're doing a really good job of increasing their own organizational cultural competence, so we're pretty hopeful that that'll be a helpful resource. And that's a good question, too, because we don't see that we're going to be the only organization to fill this gap, and a part of it is really looking for those other resources in the community that we can begin to plug in so that we can be building those community relationships. That's really what it's all about.
You had mentioned that cost is probably the top concern for everybody, and from my experience being biking in Portland, the cost of bikes in Portland is pretty comparatively high.
Yeah.
As an organization with a for-profit portion, and I'm guessing that's you selling bikes,
Yeah.
is there anything that you guys see that could be, you know, is there anything that can be done about the cost of bikes in Portland? Because it's ridiculous.
Well, supply and demand, you know. So I don't know if there's anything that we can do about the cost of bikes in Portland, but we have free earn-a-bike programs for, you know, low-income children and adults, and so that's what we can do.
Have you thought about a rent-to-own or co-assignment idea?
Yeah, we have actually. There's a couple of banks in town that have bike loan programs, and so we're interested in talking about that. We talked about a bike fleet idea, so people don't necessarily need to own the bike. They can simply check a bike out, like a bike library concept. We hadn't yet considered like a bike, like a use-to-own or work-to-own model specifically. We've talked a little bit about it.
Alison, one of the things that you mentioned was
You-
I have to hold it. Okay. One of the things you mentioned was that 48 people showed up at your open houses. Two questions. We're going to be doing a similar thing in Washington County. Are you going to do this again? And from what you said you learned, will you conduct those focus groups differently? And do you expect, because when you said 48 people, I'm worried about the turnout in Washington County. Do you expect a better result if you do it again?
Well, I think that's a good question, and for just perspective, yeah, I mean, overall we talked to 250 people, and so this is just the very beginning of what we hope to be a very long conversation, and the building of a connection within the community. And yeah, we hope to have better attendance at future events, although I'm very pleased that each of those different open houses had about 10 people. And so what that afforded us was a very rich conversation. So I don't, our goal was 10 to 20 people, so we reached our goal. The other piece is that, by continuing to show up and provide resources and develop the relationships, we do hope in the future that they'll be highly attended. And we do plan to continue the conversation.
I was just wondering where most of your funding comes from. Does it come from grants or?
As an organization, we have a pretty diversified funding stream. So we have the bike shop that generates some income. We have grants. We have individuals and businesses and events. So a pretty diversified set. For this project specifically, it was funded by Metro. And then we're doing a second phase of the project called Communities in Motion, which is about investing in the partnerships more and engaging the leadership and considering a leadership development component at the community level, and that's funded by the Kaiser Community Fund, which is administered by the Northwest Health Foundation.
Great. Other questions? There's somebody in the back who's been patient here. Do you have the speaker?
How do you perceive the interface between bikes and transit in this community? I don't know if that's something that came up. What are the attitudes towards combining bikes and transit? And do you find that many of the people who are interested in bikes are also transit users?
That's a great question. We didn't explore that. Our assumption is that a lot of these folks are walking or using public transportation if they don't own a car. And one of our programs specifically focuses on providing education about how to literally put your bicycle on a TriMet bus. We don't have one for the a max equivalent, but that's very popular and helpful, especially for folks who are using it to travel long distances. It's something that we'll look at and continue to engage in kind of connecting to your question. We'll address it when it comes up and it's brought up by the community. So I hope that it comes up.
Bob?
We started the conversation by mentioning that a lot of work has been done looking at the infrastructure for bikes, and I was just wondering if that came up. I know there was talk about fear of being near cars, but were there particular infrastructure designs or elements that were more popular or more people might be more receptive to using?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when we were at Hacienda and we were talking about riding with children, and you saw the infrastructure is pretty poor there, we talked about cycle tracks, and we were having a conversation about what a cycle track is and how it's a separated bikeway, and the participants were very excited about that. And so now there's that Cully Green Street project that includes a cycle track, and people are very excited about that going in, because that's going to not only mean a separated bikeway, but it's going to mean also sidewalks.
Other questions? Yeah.
I actually have two questions. The first question is, you talked a little bit about programmatically how this project might influence what the Community Cycling Center does in the future. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about how you think it might impact advocacy, or like building a strategy for advocating for these communities of color.
Yeah, good. Okay, one at a time, good. So we're beginning to get a sense about what that could look like. And I think essentially it looks more like community organizing than it does lobbying. So it's really working with the community to identify what are the issues that are a priority, and then how do we learn together or bring resources together to figure out how to address it. So one of the things that we're doing as a part of Communities in Motion is a policy scan. what are the different policies that impact the concerns or the interests or the barriers, and how do those decisions get made? And where might we bring that to the community conversations?
And the second question was, did you guys do any digging to figure out, there was one slide that mentioned cars will be hostile towards me, and 100% of African Americans said yes, and 0% of African and Latino communities said no?
That was simply, and they didn't say no, simply a reflection of how each group, where the discussion went with each group. So we didn't ask the same, we asked some of the same questions at both, at all the different sessions, but then we let the conversation go based on where the group was interested. So that discussion emerged with the African American group, and it didn't emerge with the others. So it doesn't indicate that they're not concerned about that, it simply didn't come up in the conversations.
So it sounds like I'm kind of in the minority here, but I was actually a little surprised to hear that cost was a concern among folks, prohibiting them from doing it, because it strikes me that once that initial outlay is made, your ongoing costs are nothing, maintenance. Even compared to transit, where you have $5 or so every time you use it. I'm wondering if you can sort of educate folks on the cost savings benefits of cycling, and if there's a way to, like the veterans programs a lot of times have ways to donate your car for a tax deduction, and I'm wondering if you could kind of find the wealthier older people that want to replace their bikes and ask for a donation for a tax deduction and recycle them into the community and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's simply the reality that the people we spoke with are facing. Remember, these are people who live in multifamily affordable housing developments, and so their discretionary funds are essentially non-existent. Everything that they have goes toward, vital purchases. And so they're just not in a position to choose to purchase something additional. That may be different in communities that have some more discretionary funds available to them. I think, I know how much, compared to a car, what a bike can save you, but if a bicycle isn't simply, if you need to drive far, if your work is far away, a bicycle simply isn't going to be feasible to do everything that you need to do. So it's simply the reality of their situations.
Okay.
One of the comments you had come up was that it isn't cool to bike, which seems to come from teenagers. Have you found any solutions to kind of get over that negative aspect where even if it's affordable, even if it's safe, it's just not the cool thing to do?
Yeah, and actually it was teens that said that. And it didn't come up in this specific needs assessment, but we went to Jefferson High School a couple of weeks ago and talked with some of the students there, and that's where it came up. They're like, yeah, they're just not cool. Your dorky yellow jackets and your spandex is not going to happen, and the helmet too. So I think the question is, how can we work with youth to design bicycles or bicycle programs that are of their design? So I've seen a couple of different programs around the country. There's a program in LA where Latino youth are designing lowriders. And there's a program out of Oakland where the African American youth are building scraper bikes. So it's a bit of a stretch for where the community cycling center is right now to do that. But we'll talk to more youth and see if there's energy around that, and then we would certainly consider it.
More questions?
Oh, you've got the web-based.
Yeah. So some of the audience is wondering, in terms of bad perception, like in some communities, riding a bike means that you lost your license or you don't have enough money to have a vehicle, and how that can be overcome. And the second part was some members of minorities may feel that they are targeted by the police. Is this really true? The statistics are showing this, or how you can work on these issues of police and targeting?
I'm terrible with two-part questions, so
Sorry.
I'll start with the second one. I haven't seen, maybe someone here has seen the statistics. I believe there has been a study that people of color are more targeted by police on not only in cars but on bicycles. Has anybody seen that? Anybody seen that? I thought I saw something that indicated that. So.
Okay. Then the first part about riding your bike has a negative image in terms of you lost your license or you don't have enough money. And
we did hear that. We heard that, in addition to, there's cultural perceptions about bicycles, and one of the things that we heard, and one thing we heard from the African American community was that in the 80s, people who rode bikes were drug dealers. And so there's a cultural perception about that. People who are on bikes are dealing. And then people who are on bikes can't afford a car. And in some communities, having a car is having arrived. Cars is part of the American dream. So part of the challenge is recreating the American dream. And I think there's a kind of a saying among bicycle geeks that when you see someone like you on a bicycle, you're more apt to try riding a bicycle yourself because you recognize something in that other person, and it makes it more possible for you to give it a shot. And so, the more people ride and the more diverse people ride, the more people consider it as a possibility for themselves. So that's part of why we conceived the I Ride campaign.
Great. I think it's about 1, so I think we need to wrap it up. And thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.